Right, it is 12:30, so we will go ahead and get started. Welcome, everybody. My name is Sarah Sims, and I'm the Assistant Director of Internships and Experiential Learning here at Washington University in St. Louis. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Open Classroom webinar series. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Open Classroom, it is the Brown School's virtual and free professional development series. Beyond Open Classroom, the Brown School offers a variety of continuing education and professional development opportunities nearly every week throughout the year, and we invite you to check those out at the web page on your screen, which I'll also drop into the chat. We'd love to have you. I'm going to start with just a couple of housekeeping items. So as you probably already noticed, this is a Zoom webinar, which means that we can't see or hear you, but we really do want to interact with you. And the chat is turned on. You can choose to chat with everybody here, meaning all participants would see what you write, or you can change your chat so that you are only sending your message to the hosts and panelists. But regardless, we would love to know who's in the room. We'd love to hear you say hello. And then we definitely want to hear your comments and especially your questions for our presenter, as there will be time at the end for some Q&A. And then also this program is being recorded. We can't share the slides themselves, but we will share the recording on our website at probably early tomorrow morning. So be on the lookout for that, and we hope that you'll share it with your friends and colleagues. Okay, so today's program is a part of our Black History Month series. Black History Month, of course, is a time in which we honor and commemorate our African American ancestors, contemporaries, and the next generation, as well as co-conspirators who have gone above and beyond in every aspect of preservation, expression, and appreciation of Black labor, creativity, strength, and innovation. If you aren't already aware, this year's Black History Month theme is Strength in Labor, the legacy and future of African American contributions. I want to acknowledge and thank the entire Black History Month Planning Committee, especially the co-chairs, Amber Brown and Miss Cynthia Williams, as well as my committee member, Amer Ursani, who's going to lead the Q&A at the end of the presentation today. And we hope that you will check out our Black History Month page, which I will link to in the chat. So as a part of Black History Month, we have developed a labor and land acknowledgement. The full acknowledgement is on our website, but I'm going to share an abbreviated version here. As the Brown School celebrates 100 years of education, service, and community impact, spanning local, national, and international spheres, we honor the land we gather on and the labor of Indigenous, Black, immigrant, American-born, and other marginalized communities whose contributions have profoundly shaped St. Louis and our institution. We recognize the injustices endured and the sacrifices and contributions of these communities whose exploited labor and unwavering resilience have strengthened the university and our broader region. This acknowledgement reflects our steadfast commitment to equity, justice, and community partnership as we look to the future. So, with that, it is now my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, who is Mr. Malik Ahmed. Mr. Ahmed has been a pioneer in the field of community development for over the past 50 years. In 1983, he established one of the most effective outcome-based community development organizations, Better Family Life, Inc., serving the St. Louis metropolitan area. Better Family Life also has chapters in 4 additional American cities. He holds a BA degree in economics and an MS in policy analysis, along with a certificate of completion from Harvard University's Kennedy School of Government. Mr. Ahmed is the author of the book From the Projects to the Pyramids: In Search of a Better Family Life, published in 2019. And we are so lucky to have him here today to discuss from free enslavement labor to economic justice. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and allow just a quick transition for Malik to share his and invite you to start your presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. First of all, I'd like to thank Sisters um, Cynthia Williams and Amber Brown and the entire Black History Month committee for inviting me to present today. And I'm also thankful to all of those who register for this seminar. I hope you find it informative, enlightening, and educational. I look forward to receiving your comments at the end during the discussion session. This seminar will explore the multi-dimensions of the exploitation of Black labor with a fresh view of how European global powers use trade and militarism to subdue the African continent and commence the transatlantic enslavement trade. It will outline the many attempts of the Black labor class struggle for the abolition of enslavement and their fight for human rights as critical developments in the struggle for paid Black labor, trade associations, the organizing of Black labor unionism, and the advent of the civil rights movement. European nations gained military strength and technical skills in the making and use of sophisticated weaponry and shipbuilding due to the century-long intra-European wars waged on the European continent, thereby obtaining the first stage of global power. After European nations conquered the Iberian Peninsula from the Arab African nation of Morocco, they engaged in multiple wars for the control of the trans-Sahara trade routes. And that trans-Sahara is very important historically. By the middle of the 15th century, around 1450, in the 1450s, European powers became fascinated with the glorious legends of the abundance of West African gold riches and trade along the trans-Sahara desert. And those riches were stories out of Mali about the great Malian wealth and the gold and the abundance of it. The major terminals of the departure of gold was in the ancient Malian Empire and along the western coast near the present-day countries of the Republic of Ghana and Cote d'Ivoire. Europeans and African states engaged in fierce battles. The western coast was ideal for European merchants and traders. Portugal took control of the gold trade on the western coast of Africa called the Gold Coast because of the abundance of gold there. The construction of military forts using enslaved Africans began. Unpaid African labor was used to build ports, holding cells, barracoons, and barracoons just simply mean jails or holding cells, and prisons. Other European and Arab powers, through militaristic maneuvers and trade, established similar outposts and military force on Africa's western and eastern coasts and along the coast of the Indian Ocean. European Arabs and a few African city-states, ethnic groups, empires, and clans grew rich and powerful due to the demand for gold, Black labor, and the exportation of Africans to territories in the Middle East, Europe, and the so-called New World of the Americas and the Caribbean islands. The role played by African city-states in exploiting Black enslaved labor. Ouidah in present-day Benin, which is on the western coast, was a major export terminal, and so was Lagos in present-day Nigeria, major export terminal for the exportation of Africans. The Akans of Ghana and the Wolof of Senegal, also West Coast traders, and as well as the Swahili Arabs, were traders on the eastern coast of Africa. Africa traded spices, gold, and humans to European for gun and gunpowder, pottery, alcohol, especially rum, cotton goods, and other cheap tawdry items. This lopsided and immoral trade imbalance had a devastating effect on the African continent and its people. One, Africa's military, population, and economic strength diminished, resulting from intra-African wars, misguided trade, greed, and trust of European merchants and traders. Two, Africa is unable to protect itself from enslavement raids and foreign port construction. Africa reduced to a continent of exploited labor, perpetual plunder of its natural resources, and widespread bloodshed, which resulted in the depopulation of Africans, especially the exploitation of its most productive demographic population, those ages 13 to 35-year-old adolescents, as well as young adults. Africa was unable to defend itself against hostile exploiters of land, resources, and population. This global trade commenced a war that lasted for about 150 years on the Atlantic Ocean. Various European countries went to war with each other. England and France, Portugal and Spain, Spain and Holland, France and Spain, Holland and Norway. The Atlantic Ocean was what we would probably call today the internet, the superhighway of commerce as well as people. Europeans signed this warfare was so great and so costly that Europeans signed agreements with each other to regulate their total control of the enslavement trade along and on the Atlantic Ocean. The increased need for African labor in European countries necessitated a justification for their inhumane treatment. And some of those justifications included the intellectual justification. For Black enslavement, they claimed that the brain capacity of Africans was smaller than that of other races, especially the white race. Africans were depicted to European populations way before in America, in literature, publications, theater, and academia as people without a civilized history and culture. Hence, Africa was called the Dark Continent. Africans were also said to be scientifically and biologically inferior, yet physically stronger than Europeans, ideal for enslavement and hard labor. The African continent and its population had made no scientific, again, this was what was claimed, made no scientific breakthroughs to advance world civilization. Africans as the biblical offsprings of the curse of Noah's son's Ham. Africans as heathens, infidels, unchristian, Islamic, and paganistic. Africans as subhuman. Its people lived in jungles and trees and went about naked without wearing clothes. Africans ate uncooked meat and human flesh, cannibalism. These were all of the justifications in Europe about why Africans were the enslaved people. Africans was transported to the new imperialistic colonies in the Americas and Caribbean islands, such as Cuba, Jamaica, Barbados, Haiti, Brazil, and America's British colonies. Europeans waged wars on indigenous populations wherever they went for control of their land. They also enslaved most indigenous people and also committed genocide. Their search was for precious metals, gold, copper, tin, iron, etc. And in that search, it helped to create a new export economy, go from the Americas and the Caribbean and copper and tin from Central and South America into Europe for the building of Europe. And this new export economy created a demand for new labor. And that demand and the middle class status that occurred in European countries, there was a growing need for cash crops, such as sugar, tobacco, rice, cocoa, and much later cotton. European powers established colonies throughout the Americas and the Caribbean island as models for perpetual enslavement. Now, again, we're going to explore that. Brazil and some of the other countries and islands, they had no intent of freeing those who were captured. The English crown provided land contracts to shipping corporations and merchants to conquer, exploit, and cultivate new lands. British merchants bring white indentured servants to American colonies. Specific terms of service as unpaid labor called debt servitude, sometimes from 5 to 10 years. But while indentured servants, white indentured servants, proved to be inadequate for the harsh environmental conditions and strenuous physical labor of plantation life, it resulted in a few things. One, the results was widespread disease and death. Two, runaways became a big problem. So there was an increased reliance in the British colonies for the importation of Africans. Black people as indentured servants in America, British colonies, was pretty much on the same level as white indentured servants, but their term of service was a lot longer, between 7 and 20 years. And as a result of being educated, there were a lot of disputations and the use of the courts to petition and sue for freedom. Increased marriages between white and black indentured servants became a major problem. They began to protest their harsh working conditions, low pay, and extension of work contracts. And as a result of all of this protest, quite naturally, there became a change in the legal status of black indentured servants. The legal status of black people became restricted and harsher. Black people were condemned to perpetual enslavement, just like what was taking place on the Caribbean islands, with Massachusetts as the first colony to codify into law perpetual enslavement. Other colonial legislators followed: Delaware, Maryland, Virginia, and then it spread throughout all of the 13 colonies. Colonies codified property rights, and black people were regarded as chattel or the property of their enslavers. Once America gained its independence from England, the United States Constitution upheld property rights as the continuation of black enslavement. The cultivation of cotton and expansion of enslavement to newly acquired southern lands, which increased the cruelty of enslavement and the scientific, legal, social, and intellectual justification of black enslavement. The rise of America's Academy and professional associations helped to perpetuate the myth of black inferiority. Southern states became the poster child of brutal black enslavement, misery, black family separation, and death. Blacks are unable to sue for freedom or protest against the inhumane abuses of their enslavers. They had no rights at all. Consequently, this created a rebellious class of plantation dwellers, rebellions on Southern plantations reported by historians were close to 250 to 300. Organized other attempts of the Black labor class to sabotage the plantation was ongoing. They organized killings of enslavers and planters. They waged strikes on those plantations. They organized Black workers on plantations to do work stoppages, to destroy the instruments and tools of labor, organizing poor and white enslaved Blacks, enslaved workers feigning illnesses. One of the strategies also in the protest was learning to read and write, and as well as the development of the Underground Railroad and other escape means, forging relationships with indigenous populations. Some of the sheroes and heroes of that time was John Brown Rushworth, Paul Cuffey, Gabriel Foster, Harriet Tubman, Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, Nat Turner, Martin Delany, Ida B. Wells, Denmark Vesey, Henry Highland Garnet, and a host of others, all advocating for freedom and paid labor. Black people in the early labor movement in the early 1900s. In 1835, Black ship caulkers organized for higher wages. 15 years later, in 1850, formed the Colored Laborers Union and the American League of Colored Laborers. Throughout the Southern states, Black sharecroppers protested for fair treatment and equitable distribution of harvested crops. Black sharecroppers and workers coalesced with poor white farmers to form the Progressive Farmer and Household Union and the Southern Tenant Union. They also worked on the political front and worked with the populist political party to advocate fair wages and labor laws and better working conditions for poor Black and white agricultural and coal mine workers. In the 1880s, Black women organized work stoppages, such as the Atlantic Washwomen Strike. So Blacks were moving throughout the enslavement period to organize themselves to be recognized. But the breakthrough in the labor movement came in the early 1900s with the rise of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. It was first organized in 1925 as employees of the Pullman Palace Car Company. They led an unsuccessful attempt at winning union recognition from the Pullman Company. In fact, Pullman had its own way of representing its Black porters and maids that did not include any kind of fair treatment. Pullman intense opposition to unionizing the Black porters, of them having their own union. After 3 or 4 years, the Pullmans got wise. They knew that the porters got wise. They knew that the Pullman companies would fire many of those who were working and also trying to hire, trying to organize the union. So what the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters did, they hired A. Philip Randolph, who was not a Pullman, but he was also a leading voice in union organizing among poor people and poor Black people in particular. So A. Philip Randolph began to lead the union recognition and negotiation with the Pullman Company. Quite naturally, it was not no easy cakewalk. During this 12-year struggle, there was increased employee firing and family harassment, spying on the activities of the Brotherhood Sleeping Car Porters, using government and local police forces to disrupt intimidate, and break up strikes and the distribution of union information and activities. Pullman Company also organized disinformation and harassment campaigns using, quote, the Black respectable leaders to condemn the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and its leaders with labels such as radical and revolutionary, communist agitators, un-American, and subversive. We've heard a lot of those same terms leveled against Martin Luther King. Pullman Company also withheld employee wages and charged exorbitant fees for the use of the company's housing, food, and sleeping facilities. It was almost just like the sharecropper system. The more you tried to get out of their exploitative conditions, the more they pulled you into it. The working porters worked on average of 240 to 300 hours per month and had exceptionally low compensation. One of the ways that they got their money was by getting tips from the patrons of the Pullman workers. And the fight was ongoing for labor rights for African Americans. But Randolph was unafraid of all of the tactics used by the Pullman Company. The leadership, there are two people that should be singled out in the success of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. A. Philip Randolph, along with this beautiful Black woman by the name of Rosina Tucker. They helped to integrate the struggle against the Pullman Company with the Black civil rights and human rights movement. They made effective use of Randolph magazine, The Messenger, to publish the plight of Pullman workers and the illegal tactics used by the Pullman Company. And they were able, the Pullman, they were some of the pioneers of the civil rights movement. They were able to galvanize Black newspapers. And because they were on the trains, they were sending the publications of the Black press throughout the country. And they were in that area able to help make Black publishing widespread and national, as well as making interesting stories or getting people to read interesting stories. And they themselves were an interesting story. They were able to organize progressive church ministries to protest against unfair labor treatment, human rights, and governmental white racism. Under Randolph and Rosina Tucker, they called for the first March on Washington in 1943 that compelled President Roosevelt to desegregate the armed services and defense industries through executive orders, which increased job opportunities for Blacks in government and private industries. And we're going to go back to that. And after 12 years, they won the struggle of union recognition by the Pullman. Black women in the labor movement. We already said Rosina Tucker, who was the wife of a Pullman worker, the wife of a Pullman worker who actively worked with A. Philip Randolph to organize union workers and win recognition of the union, and organize a sister union to the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters called the Women's Economic Council, which helped create the Women's Trade Union League, which consisted of people who worked as domestics and in laundries and hotels and maids and restaurant workers. They also, while the Pullman Company was withholding wages, Rosina Tucker helped to provide financial and moral support to Pullman families impacted by lost wages and firing. She also helped to create the hotel and employee and restaurant employee called Here Union. Another major Black woman in the labor movement was Mary Cloud Bethune. She helped to organize the National Association of Teachers in Colored Schools, renamed the National Education Association. She founded the Bethune-Cookman University. She was a member of the unofficial Black presidential cabinet that advised President Roosevelt on pertinent Black issues and demands. And she was the founder of the National Association of Black Women. Another Black woman was Charlotte Adelman, who founded the Laundry Workers Union, which merged with the Amalgamated Clothing Workers of America Union. Some of our contemporary leaders. One is a young man by the name of Chris Smalls, who was the first to organize and unionize Amazon workers successfully. Chris was fired by Amazon, but he was successful in helping to organize a few union warehouses on the East Coast. His goal is to make all of the warehouse workers benefit from unionizing and allow them to decide if they want to join a union. Locally in St. Louis, we have the dynamic work of Lou Moy, who is President Emeritus of the St. Louis chapter of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionism. And this is a union that has done a lot to integrate civil rights work, community development work with union organizing. The Coalition of Black Trade Unionism was established in 1972 as a national organization with over 50 chapters and affiliate throughout the United States, including union representations from the UAW, Amalgamated Clothing and Textile Workers, United Food and Commercial Workers, the Brotherhood of Black Packing House Workers, as well as Teamsters. Operating in the St. Louis metropolitan area, the CBTU has helped to increase Black membership in all trade unions, auto, aircraft, electrical industries. They've also worked in the joint arena of civil rights and voter registration and participation drive, helping to elect the first Black mayor of St. Louis. They've been involved with community activism. They worked with and helped support the Black Lives Matter movement, the Ferguson movement. They were very active in the free Nelson Mandela movement and the boycott of South African products. Lou Moya is a treasure in our city who have been organizing for the last 61 years of his life. This brings me to another very important part as I end this discussion with you. One is, what is the future of Black unionism? I think the future is very much like the struggle that we've been in for the last 200-300 years. President Trump has done something very significant that may impact all unions. He is trying to fire over 100,000 federal employees. What you should know about federal employees, as I pointed out in the discussion, is that in 1943, that's when the federal employees were integrated. Blacks were able to get federal jobs. So when you hear President Trump talking about firing all of these federal employees, he's talking about a major chunk of Black individuals. And that major chunk has constituted the Black middle class, has made up the strongest part of the Black middle class. And then on top of that, if he is successful and even downsizing this group, then it goes to the states. And these Republicans, as you have seen and you've heard, they're following lockstep into what Trump agenda is all about. And then the other attack on the labor movement is this attack that will commence with this free state right to um, free labor states, which could and is already in many southern states, and it could go throughout the country, which will make it very difficult for labor unions to organize. So as I conclude this presentation, and I'm open to all of your questions, we as a community and as a people who love justice, who love equality, who love fairness, we must lift our voice and be in solidarity with union organizing because it may get very complicated. And that's not to say that there aren't struggles within the union movement with respect to African Americans. That's an ongoing struggle. So as my presentation showed you, there's been a struggle from the day we arrived to the present. But don't feel bad. Don't think that is hopeless. Struggle is indeed what creates human progress. America is great today because of the struggles and the voices that have been raised by African Americans and other people, oppressed people, to make this a more fair and equitable society. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm glad to know that Better Family Life is in our audience. I hope that I have represented you well and to keep your struggle up. Thank you very much. Now the floor is open for any questions that we can entertain, and I hope and pray that I have the answer that is satisfactory to you. There's a lot of research that you can do on the Black labor movement, and I will definitely ask you to take it very serious. Learn about this struggle. Learn about how significant the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters were to the development of African Americans as we see and know us today.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed, for that incredibly enlightening presentation. And I really enjoyed that you ended on a note of hope. That was very, very inspirational. And I do have some great questions from the audience. So I was hoping to take a minute to answer this. So my first question from the audience, just give me 1 second. Maybe we'll start with this one. For those in the audience who are unfamiliar, can you talk a little bit more about Better Family Life? Maybe a brief overview of the organization?
Better Family Life was founded in 1983 as a community development holistic agency. The premise of Better Family Life is that we must strengthen the fabric of the family, that the family is the strongest unit of a city, a community, a nation. And that if we can make improvements in the family structure, we can make improvements total. One of the premise of Better Family Life is rather than looking at the negatives of African American life, look at the assets that we have and to build on those assets. So in Better Family Life, we have 5 core areas that we have built on. One is definitely our youth, our families, and we offer clinical services. We offer workforce development programs for people who are unemployed or underemployed or skill deficient. We also have a cultural arts program. We talked about, I think at the end of this program, we'll talk about Black Dance USA that's coming up in April. We have a housing program that help people with down payment assistance and asset development. We also have a entrepreneurial program that for people who are trying to go into business but don't have the knowledge or the means, to give them the fresh information that they need, the how to, and to walk them from A to B, and also try to find small loans, micro grants that can help get them started. Those are some of the programs that Better Family Life offers. We're working, our goal is to build 100 homes on the Page Boulevard corridor and strengthen North St. Louis.
Wow.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. That's a lot of great work within the community, and just want you to know, Mr. Ahmed, that people are giving you your flowers in the chat. Very, very appreciative of this great lecture that you gave us. I do have a question from the chat. So if the model in Europe and some places in the US was indentured servitude with eventual freedom, why did this change to slavery with no chance of freedom?
I think I said it in the lecture. When the whites indentured servants and the Black indentured servants began to get together, there was a lot of integration going on and intermarriages and children born. And so they had to come up with some system. First of all, if it was an offspring of a white male and a Black female, they said that if the mother was born in slavery, the child would be also born in slavery. And then the same thing, if it was a Black man and a white woman, if the Black man was born in slavery, then the child, the offspring, would be a slave. So it got harsher because people were fighting for their freedom even before the colonial period ended. One of the promises that very few people know, part of the colonial power that was fighting the British, the 13 colonies, they promised Black people freedom, that if Black folks would fight for the colonies after winning their independence from England, they were free to enslave people. But at the same time, the abundance of land, mainly from France selling that big swath of land in the Southeast that created the states of Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, and some of the other places that it became very lucrative. And the justification as Black people being subhuman had already been in the literature for 100 to 200 years. So it was codified as this is the people that should be in perpetual slavery because they're not human, they're subhuman. They're not human beings to be able to appreciate what freedom was all about.
Thank you. Thank you. I have another question from the audience. Can you explain the difference between DEI, affirmative action, and Civil Rights Act of 1965? And who were the largest beneficiaries of these policies?
Well, I think that one of the things that Lou Moyer told me that I thought was quite interesting, and again, he's the president emeritus of the St. Louis chapter of the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists. One of the things he told me, he said he arrived at his job at Chrysler as a result of the civil rights legislation of 1964-65. And when discrimination was being attacked, that's when Chrysler opened the door for Blacks who had been trying to get into those jobs. So civil rights activism in the 1960s, 65, that led to the Voting Rights Act and affirmative action and all of the rest of those things were key to Black empowerment and Black employment. DEI and some of these other variations are just really offshoots of what was fought for in the 1960s, 1950s, 1960s. So I would just say that they are extensions, and extensions that included other people other than African Americans.
And which that's a great point, and this dovetails into the next part of that question. Can you explain how the removal of federal programs affects American people at large?
Well, again, this country was founded on slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you start removing people's rights, you're going back into an era of inequality, brutality. And we should try to resist that in every way we can, because we know where we've come from and we don't want to go back, and we cannot go back.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and this relates to another audience question. Do you have any recommendations for next steps for us to fight against the unfair, unjust Project 2025 agenda?
Yes. I do a lot of work in the African American community, so I'm gonna speak to African Americans. What happened, I think, with a lot of us is that over the last 25 to 35 years, we've gotten very lazy. We start, going completely into the myth of equality, and we became relaxed. We start abandoning our own history of having to fight and struggle for every gain that we have made. So my advice to not only African Americans, but to all impacted people, but especially to African Americans, is that we've got to organize. You should belong to some organization that is fighting to right the wrongs that have been inflicted on us and that continues to be inflicted on us. To think that you can do it as an individual is a myth that has never proven to be successful. Power in America is one of organized resistance to injustice. It is not an individual struggle. It is a collective struggle. So I would say to African Americans, if you don't have an organization to join Better Family Life. It has a membership organization. It should be a vehicle for helping to transform our community. It must be a vehicle to help transform our community. And I would say any passion that anyone has, get with other people that have the same passion. You must, the agenda of 2025, that was a well-organized agenda. And the people who put that forth, they have been putting that forth since the first Trump administration. And they stayed on their job. And now they're now enacting some of the policies and the ideas that came out of that struggle. We must do the same thing, nothing less.
Thank you, thank you. I have another question here. How do you see the role of Black history evolving in mainstream education, and what could be done to ensure it's taught comprehensively given our current political climate?
I think that the attack on Black history is an attack again, that was orchestrated by a very conservative movement that intend to wipe out books out of curriculums to make it such that we get the American story as told by the people who left us out of history.
Mhm.
Academia is going to have that fight. Students in academia would have to wage that fight. Black history, women's history, and all other oppressed people's history was a struggle from the beginning to get. It's going to be a struggle to be maintained. We know that if we do nothing, the forces that are working 24 hours a day will continue to erase our gains.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed. I am going to pass it back to Sarah to share some upcoming programs and to kind of transition us forward. So, Sarah?
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ahmed, for your presentation and for all of the work that you do with Better Family Life in our community. As noted on the screen, today's program was recorded and the video will be shared as soon as it's processed on our website, which I will drop that into the chat, along with several other
Can I
links
just make one correction?
Yeah, of course.
I am the retired CEO of Better Family Life. The current CEO is Daryl Grimes, and he's doing an outstanding job. And there's a beautiful group of staff. So any way I can just help, I try to help. But I want everyone to know that we have a dynamic new CEO who's been in place now for 5 years.
Thank you,
Roger.
Mr. Ahmed.
My job is to spread Better Family Life throughout the country and probably throughout the world. That's the next chapter for me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing that and for spreading the work of it. The recording, we will not, somebody asked in the chat if we will email the recording. We're not going to email it, but you can visit the link at any time. Those are kept in our video library indefinitely, so you can check out the link to see this recording, and you can also share it from there. So Mr. Ahmed did a fantastic overview of the history of Black labor from enslavement to freedom. And I think it's a great educational resource. So please do feel free to check that out and share it. I want to make sure that everybody knows about our next and final webinar of this year's Black History Month series. It's with Dr. Sharita Butler Barnes, and it is next week, Thursday, February 27th. It's free, so please sign up, and we would love to see you there. If you can't make it, it will also be recorded and shared on our website. I also shared the link a few times to Better Family Life's website so you can learn more about the work that organization does. Specifically, they have the Black Dance USA. It is that organization's 40th anniversary. So that program is coming up April 10th through the 12th. And I dropped a link specifically to that program in the chat as well if you're interested in learning more or attending. Again, as our last program of Black History Month, I just want to thank everybody, all of our presenters and the committee for putting together this year's series, and we look forward to doing it again in 2026. Although we know that Black history should and be celebrated every day of the year. March is Social Work Month, and we do have 2 free open classroom webinars scheduled. March 4th is Infertility and Mental Health, Unmasking the Emotional Roller Coaster, and March 11th will be PTSD and Health, Unraveling the Impact. Those are free, and so we hope that you'll sign up for those. The links were in the chat. And that's all we have. Thank you all so much for attending and joining us today. Thank you so much for your very active chat. All of the comments and questions were excellent. And again, thank you, Mr. Ahmed, for your time and all of your contributions. Happy Black History Month, everyone.
Thank you
Bye.
very much. Bye.